Hey, warmer from below! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast Coast Heaps with myself, Craig Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be going guest-free today, and we're going to be taking a look at just something that I think a lot of people have question marks with on myself, and that's how I evaluate these teams in the offseason, how I go about trying to be able to come up with numbers to begin the start of the college basketball season when it comes to those opening night games, which obviously we are far ways away. We've been joined by our good friend Rocco Miller, who does just so much great work in terms of scheduling front in college basketball over at bracketeer.org if you're looking for a lot of these schedules for the upcoming season with regards to teams setting up things in the non-conference portion. But we're going to be taking a look at just how I come up with all of this and just some of the nooks and crannies that are involved and why my power rankings are very fluid, because so many handicappers, I'm one of them, you have sort of your baseline numbers, but I very much deviate away from these quite a bit based on the situation, based on the matchup, and I think that is so important because I do think that every game is its own living, breathing entity. We're going to be diving into that and so much more tonight, and I'm doing this podcast just wanting to try to get you guys sort of something that I think is going to be of value for the upcoming season. It's something that I think that you want to hear about, and I do want to get your input as to what you want to hear on this podcast. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @JNR41. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And also a big reason why I do want your Twitter/X questions is that we are just really running thin on college basketball news, because with the way that things were set up this offseason, the portal closed in very early May. We've had a few exceptions with like a coach runoff, with a few waivers like we saw with Tyshawn Claude about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, him transferring on over to North Carolina. That means that things have been very set in stone with these rosters for the last few weeks, other than a few small moves like David Hewitt heading on over to Kansas. And I do think that that's going to be to our advantage this season, because that's going to lend for more time to be able to get prepared for the upcoming season. You've been hearing it on these conference previews. It does feel like there's a lot less TBD in terms of the actual rosters itself. Now, how these pieces are all going to be coming together, that's something that I'm going to be diving into in this podcast as well. And I do have to take one break on the podcast, so this segment is going to be a little bit shorter, but I do think that it is very important to just be mindful of where these coaches come from with these new coaching hires. Like, you've got some guys that come over from the Division II level, from the NAIA level, and I've seen time and time again, a lot of these guys, they stick to their guns. Meanwhile, when a coach goes from like the mid-major ranks, I think a great example of this is Grant McCaslin from last season, who was over at North Texas. He made the jump up to Texas Tech. He did deviate a little bit more from his system, not like Texas Tech was necessarily barreling down and playing at some sort of a just super duper warp speed tempo or anything like that, but certainly after his North Texas team was dead last in the country in terms of total possessions per game the previous year, was playing a little bit faster, and we do, in my opinion, find that quite a bit with these coaches that go from the mid-major ranks to the power conference. I think that when a coach does go up to the power conference ranks, they do feel a little bit more pressure to not completely bomb out, because when you do play a little bit more of a distinct style, when you do have something that really works at the mid-major ranks, I do think that coaches question themselves. Like, I look at what Shaka Smart did when he was over at VCU. That Havoc style defense was just so great for him, and then he goes on over to Texas, completely abandons it. Now he goes over to Marquette. He's starting to really get back to his roots. He's been able to, once again, be at his best as a coach after over at Texas. It just felt like it wasn't necessarily a fit. So I think that that's something that is so important to be mindful of. And how about if in the next segment we take a look at so many different keys, what I take a look at when I am handicapping these matchups, why I do have sort of a base level for a lot of these teams in terms of the way that I rate them, but again, why I do think that these games are a living, breathing entity and why it should be treated as such. We're going to dive in on that next, right here on Coast Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Heaps Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoy this podcast I am doing. And once again, like I was saying in segment number 1, if you do have a suggestion that you want me to touch upon for this podcast, at @GUnit_81 as conference previews are continuing. Plan on doing the SWAC within the next, we're going to call it about 10 or so days, if at all possible. I've got the Sunbelt podcast brewing up for this weekend as well, so those are going to be 2 that are going to be on tap, as I've done over half the conferences in all of college basketball. Always go with the mid-major conferences first, and then we get into the power conferences towards the end, and we're going in alphabetical order. So right now we are on the S's, but I do want to address on this podcast just how I handicap a lot of these teams going into the upcoming season, how I come up with rankings, and why I do think that the matchup is so big. And let's start right there with regards to the matchup itself, because I do think that how a team is going to be playing against a bigger team versus a smaller team is so big, going up against a unique style as well. Like, you'll notice this with a lot of my handicapping. A team like Stephen F. Austin, I'm going to rate a little bit more highly in terms of non-conference play versus conference play, because even with a school like Stephen F. Austin actually making a last exchange back to the Southland, they were in the Southland just a few seasons ago. A team like a Nichols, a team like Incarnate Word, they have seen their style before. When you play against a team like a Stephen F. Austin, we talked about this on the podcast a few days ago with Ryan McIntyre, it's so hard to be able to prepare for sort of that, I always like to call it psycho zone defense, that they do a great job of being able to generate turnovers, and just the element of surprise I think is so big with regards to a defense like that. A team that plays a very unexpected style like that, well, it is a case where you might completely whiff, and if it's a bad matchup, they get completely destroyed. At the same time, if it is something that does cause for a little bit of strife, and if it does cause a team to be outside their comfort zone, I do think that it's a big equalizer if the talent is a little bit unequal, and I think that that is so important to be taking a look at as well, because when it comes to a team like Stephen F. Austin, a team like Merrimack, if you find a good ball handler and some good three-point shooting, you actually have a good way of being able to break through that team, and you are able to find some success with teams like that. But if you have a team that is full of like a bunch of clunky bigs, a team that turns the ball over a lot in general, that does cause for a big giant issue for them. And I think that this is so important to be able to dive in on with regards to taking a look at matchups itself, because I've been touching upon this on the podcast all throughout the offseason. Teams that see different styles typically are going to be more successful in March, and those are the sorts of teams that I think deserve a little bit of a nudge up in terms of handicap. And when it comes to the bookmakers and the way that they set lines, they do an absolutely amazing job. The buildings out here in lovely Las Vegas exist not because the books are losing money, but because, for one, penny slots. You will find that casinos make a lot more out of penny slots than they do on sports betting, so I will throw that out there. But additionally, because they are very good with their numbers, they know how something should be just taken into account, but something that is hard for them to do is just to take a look outside the numbers and try to realize, oh, this matchup might be good and this matchup might be bad. A team like in the Big Ten, for example, they just see a bunch of clunky bigs. They play a little bit more slowly. Now, we are seeing a little bit more diversity in style, like with the Big Ten this past season. You saw Penn State play quite a bit differently after they brought in Mike Rhodes from VCU. It was a VCU team that was playing quite a bit more up-tempo. They were looking to generate turnovers. That, I think, is a good thing for the Big Ten. You see it as well in terms of even like to a little bit of a lesser extent the Big 12, which I think is by far the most talented league in all of college basketball, but now being able to add in their Houston. Now they're going to be bringing in a team like Arizona, going from Houston one night, going to Arizona the next. That is going to be big for them, whereas in the past few seasons, it did feel like you had a little bit more of, shall we say, set styles, but with the hiring on of TJ Otzelberger over at Iowa State, that adds for a little bit more, shall we say, of a different style than what you're going to find throughout the conference as well. And I think that this is so important for these teams in terms of getting set for March and just being able to get prepared for non-conference play as well, because when you've got a team of guys that maybe you've got those guys that spent a year or two on campus, they had to go up against Iowa State one night, they had to go up against Arizona the next night. They are very much prepared for darn near anything in non-conference play. I think that that's a big reason why Conference USA had so much of the success that they were able to in the past few seasons, and I think that this is so important to be taking into account in terms of your handicapping, because when it comes to just gauging the talent and the talent itself, you have to take your best guess, and there's going to be teams that you get absolutely right, and there are going to be teams that you whiff on. Like last few seasons, I have been high on James Madison with Mark Byington. Obviously, he's no longer in the mix over there at James Madison. Still think that when it comes to my projector or finish out there in the Sun Belt, it's not like James Madison is going to be like dead last or anything like that. I thought that they did a nice job of being able to hire on Mr. Preston Spradlin coming over from Morehead State. I think that he's going to be able to go in there and do a relatively solid job, but that was the team that I got right. I felt very good about that. Meanwhile, there are some times where you completely whiff on a team. Like I thought Arkansas was going to be one of those teams that had a little bit of a rough start to the season, but then they're able to ascend late, much like they had been able to do under Eric Musselman all throughout his tenure there at Arkansas. Did not happen this last year, and I felt like a lot of people were much like myself in thinking that way. So the fades that you got in early on Arkansas, those were very rock solid. They just held through all throughout the entirety of the season. I think that that is something to take into account as well. The power ranking that you give on a team to begin the season, it should not be the same ranking that you're going to be giving on a team to end the season as well. These teams are absolutely chock full of transfers. We see it with Eric Musselman time and time again. Heck, I would say that we're finding it a little bit more in a Big Ten team in Illinois, as Brad Underwood has done a nice job of being able to add in quite a few guys in the transfer portal, but you'll see a lot of these teams that they're very transfer heavy, that they look nowhere near the same at the end of the season as they did towards the beginning part of the season, and they're able to gain momentum, they're able to just build a little bit of chemistry, and these are teams that you want to be quickest on to be able to make adjustments for, and I do think that it is important to be adjusting a little bit accordingly on these teams that have just different level of experience, different levels of, shall we say, court savviness as well, because a team that is full of a whole bunch of seniors, a team that really ran it back, like Florida Atlantic this last year, I think is a very good example of this. They had a little bit of a lower ceiling than, say, a team like for this year, Louisville. Louisville is a completely brand spanking new team. You've got everyone coming in as transfers, essentially. You've got a new coach in Pat Kelsey. That's a team that might struggle very much early on, and I do think that that is going to be a team that, night number one, even though we saw them look very good in their foreign tour, I think that they could be one of those teams that maybe you're sitting there 7-8 games through the season thinking, oh, well, there was a lot of buzz on Louisville. They haven't been able to do anything. And then all of a sudden, they catch fire when they get into ACC play. We saw with Arkansas time and time again when they were dealing with a whole bunch of transfers. Meanwhile, if you look at a team that's full of a whole bunch of seniors, and you find it a lot in the Missouri Valley Conference, like Northern Iowa, I think is a very good example of this. Heck, if you want to go back a few seasons, that Wisconsin team that really didn't live up to expectations after they were able to have that hot end to the 2019-20 season, much like we saw with Florida Atlantic this last season, where they did not win a single game in the NCAA tournament after they had made the Final Four a season prior. I think that these are teams that are able to identify as teams that maybe you have a higher floor on them, but you have a little bit of a lower ceiling as well. You don't adjust as much of your handicap on them as you would a team like a Louisville, and I do think that this is always one of the trickiest things to do in terms of handicapping, but if you're able to do it right, you're able to make a whole bunch of money. And then when it comes to just evaluating a team for the upcoming season, you want to be gauging a lot of different things. Like, I am not one of those people that utilizes the Bart Torvik numbers, that utilizes the KenPom numbers. Not that they don't do a good job. I think that they do absolutely amazing work. Like, those are some of the smartest people in all of college basketball, but you know that the bookmakers, they're using those exact numbers, and you want to make sure that you aren't falling in the vector of just copying from KenPom, just copying from Bart Torvik, and I always encourage this as well. If you're looking to be able to just form the best opinion on college basketball, and you don't have the time to break down 364 D1 teams, which I would think that most people do not have the time to break down 364 teams, just the wide array of college basketball content that is out there, trying to be able to pick and choose from several different outlets rather than just blindly looking at one or two different metrics. I think that that's so important. Like Evan Miyakawa comes on this podcast like once or twice a year. He does some really good work. Eric Haslam over at Haslametrics, he does a great job. Like, you put all those different rankings into a blender, and then you try to be able to decipher, all right, like, Haslametrics might be higher on Louisville than, say, Bart Torvik or something like that. Trying to be able to find that middle ground, I think, is so important to be able to do, because there's blind spots in every single one of those analytics sites, and every one of them will tell you as such. Like, I know that when it comes to what we get out of KenPom, perhaps sometimes these teams that were very good in the past but might not be so good this upcoming season because of like prestige, they get sometimes a little bit overrated. And I do think that that's something that is important to be taking note of when it comes to gauging freshmen. Like, all these sites are all over the place, and it's very hard to be able to do that. And that's the toughest thing for me too, because when you have transfers that come over from like the mid-major ranks, at the very least you can say, all right, this guy was playing over in the Southland, now he has to leap on up to the Big Ten. How is this game going to translate? The three-point shooting might remain a constant, but the player's a little bit undersized. He might have a little bit of a tougher time getting his shot off. He might have a few more shots that might get blocked. I mean, that's something that you're able to do. When it comes to high school basketball, you just don't have that sample size, and that is something that I always struggle with a little bit as well. But additionally, in terms of setting an initial handicap on a team as well, I do think that it is very important to be taking a look at not just returning minutes, but if a few players have played with one another as well. Like, I look at what Josh Schertz is setting up over at St. Louis. Even though for St. Louis, you've got a lot of moving parts. You've got a lot of transfer pieces. The fact that Isaiah Swope and Robbie Avila, they were on the same team a season ago playing under Josh Schertz. That, to me, is just oh so important. And you're finding this more and more in this day and age of college basketball. These teams that they do amazing against the spread, they might have quite a few transfers, but those transfers either A, played for the same coach, like we saw with South Florida last season. South Florida brought over the Kennesaw State guys along with Amir Abdul-Rahim. They were able to make you a whole bunch of money. They were able to be a really nice surprise out in the American. I still go back to 2 seasons ago, Southern Miss, and what they were able to do when they had a few guys come over from the same team in Mercer with the likes of a Neftali Alvarez teaming up with Felipe Haas. That was a really good team against the spread. That was a team that surprised so many people out there in the Sun Belt, even though they didn't bring over the coach or anything like that. The fact that those guys had played together, I think that that's so big, and I do think that that gets lost on a lot of people. Taking a look at the chemistry aspect of college basketball, and I do think that it is hard to know exactly what you're going to be able to get out of some of these transfers, because sometimes you'll find a transfer that comes over after they just didn't do a lot at the previous stop, like Austin Carr, a really good example of this. He began his career at Delaware, and when he was over at Delaware, he was a fine player at like 6'9", 6'10". He was able to pop threes, but he was like a number 3, number 4 option for Delaware a few seasons ago. And then this past year over at Wake Forest, he averaged 13.5 points per game. In his 2 years at Delaware, he actually averaged fewer points per game, he averaged fewer rebounds per game, and shot darn near the same 3-point shooting percentage as he did at Wake Forest. As we know, the level of competition that Delaware was facing will likely a lot lower out there in the Coastal Conference than what you're finding with Wake Forest out in the ACC. And that's something that is very hard to decipher, but trying to be able to take a look at these guys that they might just be good fits in a system, because with Steve Forbes, he always looks try to feature a few different guys. He doesn't go as deep on the bench, and he decided, you know what, we're going to hitch our wagon to a versatile big man that's able to pop it from three-point range. I do think that that is very important to do, and depth I think is very big as well, because when it comes to depth, as long as you have a clean bill of health for a team that might have a really good starting 5, that could be able to carry the day for a mid-major team when they're going up against one of these just power conference teams. Meanwhile, if you have a team that has a really rock-solid starting 5 and nothing else outside of them, and they go up against a team that fouls a ton, like you find that a lot with these MEAC teams, that they foul quite a bit, the SWAC as well, they play very fast, they're going to foul a lot, but at the same time, they're going to try to put you in foul trouble. Those are the sorts of teams that, if they don't have a lot of depth, I feel very nervous about them, Meanwhile, if you can find a SWAC team that's like 8 or 9 deep, they're able to absorb a few guys getting into foul trouble. That's a team that could be able to cover a spread, a team that's able to be very rock solid. And when it comes down to it, when it comes to just going into a college basketball season, you just have to use your own intuition. You have to find what works for you, and you just need to try to be able to duplicate success based on what you have found success with in the past. Like, if you were handicapping college basketball last year and it was a complete and utter disaster, try to go back, retrace your steps, and try to find out, all right, where did I go wrong? Was it gauging some of the big men that were transferring on over to new schools? Did I go wrong with trying to take a look at like these teams that were going to be taking a smaller leap? Because I talk about it a lot on the podcast, the year 1 to year 2 jump, whether it's from freshman to sophomore year or just being in a system for multiple years. Like we saw with UConn this last year, Tristan Newton, he was pretty solid in their first national title run, but in that second national title run is really where he came into his own. He took a massive leap from year 1 to year 2 in that Danny Hurley system. I think that that's so big. Maybe you had a little bit of issue there. Being able to just retrace your steps and realizing what you got wrong, I think is so much of the battle in college basketball. And I do that myself, like I was talking about it. Trying to gauge some of these, shall we say, freshmen that are outside the top 100 rankings is something that I struggle with, just because a lot of these guys, they don't have a lot of tape out there. It's hard to know how a guy's going to be able to rise up to the college level, and that's something that I look to do a little bit of a better job of. I noticed that junior college transfers was a little bit of a weak point of mine in past years. I was able to do a much better job of being able to gauge some of those JUCO transfers last season, so just being able to try to piecemeal together what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, I think is so big for getting set for an upcoming college basketball season as well. And then from there, you just sort of have your own system of assigning numbers to a team. Like for so many handicappers, they'll go like either 0 through 50 or something like that, or they'll go like 50 through 100, where your top team might be like a 97, and then your bottom team would be like a 50. So if that top team of a 97 faces off against that bottom team of a 50, that's a 47-point difference. On a neutral court, you'd be placing that favorite at a minus 47. And then from there, you add in there the travel, the home court advantage, which I will always advocate for this on the show as well. Don't just have a boiler 3 points for home court advantage. Yeah, certainly, there are some home court advantages that they are worth exactly 3 points, but Cameron Indoor Stadium should not be valued the same in terms of home court advantage as like a trip from Fairleigh Dickinson to Wagner or something like that. I'm sorry to those who are fans of Fairleigh Dickinson and Wagner. That sort of travel is not the same as going from the West Coast and playing at Cameron Indoor Stadium. It just is not. And I think that that is so important to be doing as well, but adding in there those sorts of situations, obviously injuries, taking a look at just what the matchup presents itself in terms of size, in terms of experience, I think that that's all so important, and that's how I come up with a lot of my night one numbers. That's how I come up with just a lot of the handicapping in general that I do for these teams. I recognize that perhaps I could go into a little bit more detail, and if there is something that you found a little bit confusing about what I did today, if there's something that you do have questions about, please do fire those in. Like I was mentioning before, this is a long off season. We still have a few months until the college basketball season gets started, and I want to help you guys as much as humanly possible both get set for the upcoming season and be able to turn a profit for you guys for this upcoming season. So if you do have those questions, comments, segment ideas for this podcast, one or two ways we will fire those in. At GN_D1 on the old Twitter /X is the preferred way, and then the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. It's very much appreciated if you rate this podcast 5 stars, and then from there, you're able to fire whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast by that 5-star review. I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast. Hopefully you found this insightful, and hey, if you did find this insightful, once again, leave a comment to let me know what we did right, what we did wrong, what you could use a little bit more of, and I'll be with you guys once again tomorrow, as I'm with you guys all 366 days this year on this podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be back with you once again, most likely with a guest tomorrow.